Hello everyone, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSaysStamp.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana video. In this episode, I'm creating with the Simon Says Stamp Color Blend Cardstocks. All supplies I'm using for this project are listed and linked in the video description below. So let's jump right in. The Simon Says Stamp Color Blend Cardstock or Color Blend paper are specialty papers. They are cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so they make the perfect front for an A2 card. And they are made from 100-pound glossy cardstock. They provide a very smooth, very luxurious surface, that works fabulously well for many different techniques. You can do die cutting on this paper, you can do foiling, and you can also stamp on this cardstock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this beautiful paper to create a background for a card, and I'm also going to do some heat embossing on this paper to create colorful die cuts. So each paper, there is a little bit of a gradient, a little bit of a blend, hence the name Color Blends, and I think that this paper is just simply stunning. Here, I started planning the colors for my background, and my idea was to do a diagonal cut. So I just wanted to have a little bit of blue at the top to mimic pool, and then a little bit of blue, and then a little bit of pink that blends into yellow to mimic the area right next to the pool. That can be a patio, or that can be sand, or, whatever you want. Next, I also planned to use an older stamp set from Simon Says Stamp and Kathy Zilski. This is called Beachy Keen, and I really loved the umbrella in this image. I love that this is a half umbrella. It's not a full umbrella. It looks very unique this way. So my idea was to stamp the umbrella onto the hot pink portion of this panel. I wanted to stamp it in clear embossing ink and heat set it using white embossing powder. So I used my anti-static powder tool. I prepped the paper. You do want to make sure that you prep this particular paper very thoroughly because it is glossy and it catches, grease from our fingers like nothing else. So make sure you really prep your paper. Then I inked up my stamp using clear embossing ink, and I used an acrylic block. I didn't use my Misty, I just used a clear block here, and I stamped the umbrella onto the paper. This particular paper, because it is glossy, it takes ink really well. Now, you won't necessarily be able to stamp on this paper using regular ink because it is glossy and the regular ink will smear. So just keep that in mind. If you want to do regular stamping, you might need to use some sort of specialty ink like StazOn. But if you want to do heat embossing, you can easily do that. Here, I'm showing you how I'm creating the pink umbrella, although in the end, I ended up using a yellow umbrella for my card because that just made a little bit more sense. After I added embossing powder, I used a paintbrush and I cleaned up any stray embossing powder particles from my paper. And then I used my heat tool and I heat set all of that beautiful powder in place. This paper also embosses beautifully. It embosses really quickly. I don't know, maybe it was because it was super hot in my apartment. We're in the middle of summer, and believe it or not, I do not have my AC installed yet. So it was unbearably hot. So maybe that's why the paper embossed super quickly. But, either way, it embossed beautifully. And I think that this cardstock is fabulous for heat embossing. So in the past, I have used this paper to create backgrounds for my cards, and I love to use it for that. But for this card, for this video, I thought I would not only use it for the background, but also use it to create colorful die cuts or colorful stamped images. So here you'll see me emboss images onto this paper to have a little bit of that beautiful gradient. Now, once you've embossed your paper, make sure to give it a few seconds to cool. Here you can see me like flapping the paper in the air, making sure it is cool, and then wipe the excess embossing powder off so that you bring the glossiness of that paper back to life. Otherwise, you have all of that anti-static powder sitting on top of the paper and it just does not look well. Okay, next I want to trim this panel, and I'm using my light blue sheet that I previously cut as a guide. I'm adding a little bit of yellow tape from the back. I'm just taping temporarily these two pieces in place, and I'm going to use my paper trimmer and create a diagonal cut. The reason I do this is because I want to make sure I maximize each sheet. This paper is a little bit expensive, so I want to make sure I'm not wasting anything. I want to make sure that I am using every little bit of this paper for my cards. With that done, I then used a coordinating die and I die cut my umbrella out. The stamp set that I'm using today, the Beachy Keen, there is a set of coordinating dies available, and it's fabulous, because you can cut your images out, you can cut the sentiments out. There are sentiments included in this die set, and they take center stage on your card because the sentiments are nice and large. Here I'm using my new Platinum Scout die cutting and embossing machine to die cut my umbrella out, and we are almost ready to go. Like I said, I'm showing you how I created the pink umbrella, but in the end I went ahead and I made a yellow umbrella instead because that just made a little bit more sense for my card. So here you can see that I've changed things around a little bit. Now I have teal cardstock for the pool or for the water. And I also have my yellow umbrella. I have also already heat embossed and cut out a sentiment. It reads, "Hello, sunshine." I did that using white embossing powder, the same embossing powder that I used for the umbrella and that I'm now going to use for the flip-flops. And I also have an additional sub-sentiment that reads, "You are so cool." So I have this sheet of yellow paper. It's also cut diagonally because I was kind of experimenting and trying to see if that would work for my card. And I also had a friend over and he really wanted to play with my supplies and he was inspired. I was making my card and he wanted to make a card of his own. So that's actually a piece from a card that he was attempting to make. Anyhow, so I stamped the flip-flops onto the paper. Once again, I made sure to treat that paper with an anti-static powder tool so that I did not have any stray embossing powder particles. I stamped the flip-flops using clear embossing ink. I added my detail white embossing powder and I heat set it using my heat tool. Now, I also have this little leftover piece of pink cardstock. It's the same paper that I was just using for the umbrella. And even though it's not large enough for the entire flip-flops image, it's still, pretty big for me to create a partial. So this is what I'm going to do. Again, I don't want to waste this paper, so I'm just stamping a partial image onto this, going to add my embossing powder, heat set, and I will then cut those flip-flops out and still use them on my card as a partial. So look at your little pieces of cardstock. Even if they seem too small, think about what partial image you can create using those papers. I then use the coordinating dies and I cut the flip-flops out in my die cutting machine. And now it's time to assemble our card. Here I have a panel of white cardstock. This is Neenah Solar White. It is cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So I'm using this paper to hold my diagonal cut papers in place. I've added adhesive to the front of my panel. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Dot adhesive. And I first added the ground part. So I have my yellow to pink ombre panel. And then I added the blue part, the pool or the water part. Now the water part was a little bit too long and I used my paper trimmer and I trimmed that off. Again, I'm saving that piece because I just love this paper so much. I don't want to waste any of it. Now that my background is ready, I can go ahead and assemble my pieces. I already have a general idea what I want to do and how I want the pieces to be placed on the card. So I want the umbrella to be located between the water, between the pool, and between the ground. Then I'm going to add my sentiment, and I'm also going to add my flip-flops. The partial flip-flop image is going to sit from the bottom, like so, and then the other flip-flops are going to sit in the middle. Now I went ahead and I die cut another piece for the sentiment. I just used the coordinating die and I cut that from black cardstock. This is regular black cardstock from Simon Says Stamp. So I backed my die cut up to make it a little bit sturdier. I like to do that with my die cuts. And while that is drying, I'm going to go ahead and start adhering pieces or elements down. I'm always using foam adhesive. You guys know me. I love to pop things up on my card. So I added foam adhesive tape to the back of my umbrella. Next, I'm going to add foam adhesive tape to the back of my sentiment. And here, I'm actually going to double up the adhesive because I want the sentiment to be raised above the umbrella. So I first added a little piece of foam adhesive tape, and then I realized that's not going to do it. And then I added more tape to pop it up even more. So I have a double layer of foam adhesive tape where that is going to be touching the background, and then a single layer where that is going to be touching my umbrella. I'm also adding glue to the foam adhesive, and I do this because I want to have a little bit of wiggle room. If you use foam adhesive squares without the glue, when you stick them down, they adhere right away. But if you add glue, you can move your element slightly until you're happy. And because this is a sentiment, because I wanted to make sure that I added it straight onto my card, I wanted to have a little bit of that wiggle room to make sure I would adhere that straight. I also added foam adhesive to my little sentiment strip. And again, I added glue in the same way. And now I'm using my T-square ruler to make sure that this is nice and straight on my background. I don't want to have any crooked sentiments here. With that done, I move on to adding the flip-flops. I use regular foam adhesive for the yellow flip-flops. And then I used thin foam adhesive squares for my pink partial flip-flops. I didn't want the partial flip-flops to be raised too much above my background because, they are partial and that's a delicate die cut. So I made sure to use thin foam adhesive there. Next, I'm using Aura sequins from Spellbinders, and I'm adding just a couple of sequins here and there to add a little bit of sparkle to this project. And at this moment, I realized that it would be nice to trim this background down slightly so that I would have a little bit of a white border on my card. I did not plan that ahead of time. I didn't think I would want it. But once I assembled everything, I figured, I think I need to have a little bit of that white border. So I brought my paper trimmer back, and now I'm cutting just a little bit off. I'm not cutting paper from each side, but just from two sides. And now I'm ready to add this onto my card base, and you can see how awesome this looks. So it's a simple card, but because I used the Color Blends cardstock, because I used that beautiful glossy cardstock, my card looks really fun. One last step, I used a white Jelly Roll pen and I added a few white dots here and there to the sand portion of my card just to mimic little specks of sand. So that finishes my video featuring the Simon Says Stamp Color Blends cardstock. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're going to give this idea a try. Even if you don't have this paper, go ahead and try to create a similar look using inks and regular cardstock. Do some ink blending, do some stamping, do some die cutting, and just have fun. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time. Love you guys, and
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at SimonsSaysStamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.